Kevin Mitnick's life reads like a Hollywood thriller, an epic tale of digital heists, high-speed chases, and a genius mind that outsmarted governments and corporations alike. He wasn't just a hacker. He was the most wanted cybercriminal in the world at one point. But how did a curious kid from Los Angeles become the FBI's #1 cyber fugitive? Let's break down his legendary story step by step. Hit subscribe now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Kevin David Mitnick was born on August 6, 1963 in Van Nuys, California, into a modest family. His parents divorced early, and he was raised by his mother, Shelley Jaffe, who worked as a waitress. Growing up in Los Angeles, Mitnick didn't have access to advanced technology, but developed a natural curiosity for how systems worked. He was drawn to solving problems and manipulating rules, often using social engineering, learning that asking the right questions was the key to accessing restricted information. This skill would later make him one of the most notorious hackers in history. By the late 1970s, Kevin Mitnick had already proven his knack for deception with his first hack, the Los Angeles bus system. But soon, he set his sights on something even bigger, the world of telecommunication networks. This wasn't just about free phone calls, it was about power, control, and the thrill of outsmarting the system. Before the internet, before modern hacking, there was phone phreaking, an underground subculture of tech-savvy individuals who hacked the telephone system to make free long-distance calls, eavesdrop on conversations, and manipulate networks. Phone phreakers weren't criminals in the traditional sense. They were pioneers, rebels, and explorers who saw the flaws in the system and couldn't resist exploiting them. Kevin Mitnick quickly became one of the best. How did phone phreaking work? To understand Mitnick's rise in the phone phreaking scene, you need to understand how the telephone system worked in the 1970s. Phone companies like AT&T used specific audio tones to route calls internally. If you could replicate those tones, you could trick the system into thinking you were an authorized operator. This meant free calls, rerouted calls, or even full control of phone networks. This is where the blue box came in. The blue box was an electronic device that could generate the exact tones needed to bypass AT&T's billing system, essentially allowing unlimited free calls. The legendary hacker John Draper, aka Captain Crunch, had popularized the blue box, and even Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak had built and sold them before starting Apple. But for Kevin Mitnick, it wasn't just about making free calls, it was about understanding and controlling the system. Mitnick wasn't content with simply building a blue box. He wanted to understand every secret of the phone system. Instead of stealing or buying one, he social engineered his way into getting insider knowledge, impersonating phone company employees. He would call AT&T and Pacific Bell tech support, pretending to be an employee. With enough confidence and the right jargon, he got real technicians to reveal sensitive information. Befriending insiders. Mitnick charmed his way into the phreaking community, gaining access to hidden knowledge that others couldn't get. He gathered classified documents about the phone system, often tricking employees into sending him internal manuals. Reverse engineering AT&T's system. Mitnick used trial and error, testing different frequencies and tones to manipulate phone networks. He could redirect calls, tap into private conversations, and shut down phone lines, all from his bedroom. Most phone phreakers were satisfied with free calls. But Mitnick took things further. He learned how to reroute calls. He could make it seem like a call from the White House was coming from a payphone. He could listen in on private conversations, including government and corporate calls. He could completely shut down phone lines, essentially making someone disappear from the network. At just 15 years old, he was outsmarting some of the biggest telecom companies in the world. But the phone companies weren't blind to what was happening. AT&T and Pacific Bell were losing millions, and they were on the hunt for the phantom phreakers who were breaking their systems. The game of cat and mouse had begun. Mitnick wasn't just hacking for financial gain, he was addicted to the challenge. He wanted to see how far he could push the system before getting caught. His skills in social engineering made him nearly unstoppable. If he needed access to a restricted phone line, he would call an employee and convince them to give it to him. If he needed a confidential document, he would pose as a manager and order someone to send it to him. If he needed to erase traces of his hacks, he would manipulate insiders to cover his tracks. Mitnick was playing the ultimate mind game, and he was winning. But every hacker makes mistakes, and soon, his name would appear on the radar of law enforcement for the first time. By the end of the 1970s, Mitnick had established himself as one of the most skilled phone phreakers in the underground scene. But the authorities were starting to crack down on phone hackers. The telecom giants knew someone was breaching their systems, and they were determined to find out who. Would Mitnick stay one step ahead, or was his first arrest just around the corner? By the early 1980s, Kevin Mitnick had already mastered phone phreaking, manipulating the world's largest telecom companies like AT&T and Pacific Bell. But when he discovered computers, a new world of possibilities opened up. This was no longer just about free calls. This was about breaking into the most secure systems on the planet. Mitnick had an insatiable curiosity and an ability to charm his way into restricted information. When he enrolled at Pierce College in Los Angeles, he quickly connected with other hackers who shared his passion for breaking into systems just for the thrill of it. In the early 1980s, personal computers were still rare. The internet didn't exist yet, and companies relied on primitive networks that were supposed to be secure. But Mitnick knew better. With access to mainframes and corporate networks, he started exploring, testing the limits of what he could do. Then, he set his sights on the ultimate target, the US military. At just 17 years old, Mitnick and a fellow hacker set out to do the unthinkable: breach the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD, the highly classified military system responsible for detecting and defending against nuclear attacks. This was the same system that inspired the 1983 movie War Games, a film about a teenager who accidentally hacks into the US government's nuclear weapons system and nearly triggers World War III. The real-life Mitnick didn't come close to launching nuclear missiles, but the media loved the story, and it would later be blown out of proportion, painting him as a dangerous cybercriminal capable of starting a nuclear war. How did he do it? Mitnick didn't need military clearance or inside access. He used the same social engineering tricks that had worked on phone companies. Gathering intel. He called employees at NORAD, pretending to be a new technician who had lost his login credentials. Exploiting weak passwords. Many government employees used simple passwords or left them written on sticky notes. Mitnick and his friend cracked them easily, accessing the system. Once inside, they browsed through NORAD's network, looking at classified files and testing how deep they could go. Mitnick wasn't trying to sell secrets or cause destruction. He was a digital explorer, pushing boundaries just because he could. But after a few months, he realized something. Hacking military networks was dangerous, so he backed off, leaving no trace of his intrusion. Unfortunately, his next big hack wouldn't go unnoticed. After testing his skills on NORAD, Mitnick returned to his favorite target, Pacific Bell. This time, he wasn't just phreaking phones. He was breaking into their entire computer network. Pacific Bell was one of the largest telecom providers in the US, and its systems were tightly guarded, at least in theory. Mitnick saw the flaws immediately. How did he hack Pacific Bell? Social engineering first. Instead of brute force hacking, he charmed his way in. He called Pacific Bell employees, posing as an IT administrator, asking for system details. He convinced operators to reset passwords or give him access codes, exploiting employee negligence. Many workers left their login credentials written down or reused weak passwords. Mitnick gained access to internal Pacific Bell computers simply by guessing passwords. Physical break-in. Not all hacks were digital. Mitnick also snuck into a Pacific Bell facility and stole internal documents that contained network schematics and security protocols. Network manipulation. Once inside, he didn't just steal data. He wanted total control. He could reroute calls, access sensitive customer data, and even disable phone services. For months, Mitnick played inside Pacific Bell's network, mapping out every vulnerability and learning its deepest secrets. But he got too comfortable. And this time, the FBI caught on. In 1983, the FBI had been monitoring unusual activity inside Pacific Bell's network. They knew someone was inside, but they didn't know who until they traced the intrusions back to Mitnick. One night, in a carefully planned raid, agents stormed his location and arrested him. Mitnick wasn't stealing money or selling corporate secrets. He wasn't a traditional criminal. He was a kid playing in a system that wasn't meant to be played with. But to law enforcement, he was already a major threat. At just 20 years old, Kevin Mitnick stood in court, facing the most serious charges of his life. The government couldn't prove he had stolen anything valuable. He hadn't sold secrets or caused financial harm, but he had humiliated one of the biggest telecom companies in the US. The judge didn't want to send him to prison, but they wanted to send a message. Mitnick was sentenced to probation. It was supposed to be a second chance, a warning to stay away from hacking. But Mitnick had tasted real power, and he wasn't about to stop. His next targets would be bigger, bolder, and far more dangerous. By the late 1980s, Kevin Mitnick was no longer just a hacker experimenting with phone systems. His targets had grown bigger, and he was now breaching the networks of corporate giants like IBM, Nokia, Motorola, and even the FBI. He combined his technical expertise with social engineering, manipulating people to gain access to highly secured systems. One of his most infamous hacks during this period was his attack on Digital Equipment Corporation. DEC was a major player in the computing industry, and its proprietary operating system software was a highly valuable asset. Mitnick infiltrated their network and copied the software, not for financial gain, but out of sheer curiosity and the thrill of proving that he could do it. His actions, however, did not go unnoticed. In 1988, the authorities caught up with him, and he was arrested for computer fraud. The court sentenced him to 1 year in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. This was his first real experience behind bars, and it was meant to serve as a lesson. As part of his probation, he was strictly forbidden from using computers or engaging in any hacking-related activities. However, Mitnick's addiction to the rush of outsmarting security systems was too strong. He couldn't resist the temptation, and soon enough, he found himself back in the game. As his probation period neared its end, Mitnick learned that authorities were once again investigating his activities. Instead of waiting to be caught, he decided to vanish. He changed identities, moved constantly, and used cloned cell phones to avoid being tracked. This marked the beginning of his life as a fugitive, where for more than 2 years, he successfully evaded the FBI while continuing his cyber intrusions. Mitnick was no longer just an ordinary hacker. He had become the most wanted cybercriminal in the United States. During this time, he broke into the systems of some of the world's largest technology companies, stealing source codes, intercepting internal communications, and even eavesdropping on federal agents as they discussed their plans to catch him. He exploited vulnerabilities in Nokia's network to obtain confidential information, infiltrated Motorola to gain access to their mobile technology, and bypassed security measures at Sun Microsystems. His ability to stay ahead of the law seemed almost supernatural. Despite the FBI's relentless pursuit, Mitnick continued to slip through their fingers. He mastered the art of digital deception, using anonymous dial-up connections, spoofed identities, and cloned cell phone numbers to create a web of confusion. He could wiretap government agencies, reroute calls, and erase digital footprints, making him nearly impossible to trace. The authorities were growing increasingly desperate, and the pressure to bring him down was mounting. The turning point came when Mitnick made the mistake of hacking into the computer of Tsutomu Shimomura, a cybersecurity expert with a personal vendetta. Unlike previous targets, Shimomura took the attack as a challenge and made it his mission to track Mitnick down. Working closely with the FBI, he used advanced tracing techniques to pinpoint Mitnick's location. On February 15, 1995, federal agents raided an apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina, and arrested Mitnick. He had spent years outmaneuvering the authorities, but his run had finally come to an end. The media went into a frenzy, turning Mitnick into a legend. Sensationalist reports claimed he had the power to launch nuclear missiles just by whistling into a phone, an exaggeration that only added to his notoriety. For the first time, Kevin Mitnick found himself completely powerless. The digital world, which had once been his playground, was now completely out of reach. His arrest marked the end of an era, but his story was far from over. Kevin Mitnick's arrest in 1995 marked the end of his life as a fugitive, but it was only the beginning of his time behind bars. The authorities, determined to make an example out of him, charged him with numerous counts of wire fraud, computer fraud, and illegal interception of communications. The prosecution painted him as a digital menace, someone who could supposedly bring down entire networks with nothing more than a phone call. One of the most bizarre aspects of his incarceration was the extreme security measures imposed on him. Officials, largely influenced by media exaggerations and misconceptions about his abilities, believed that he could somehow hack into systems remotely by whistling phone tones or speaking codes into a receiver. This led them to place him in solitary confinement for extended periods, isolating him from any possible contact with the outside world. Mitnick himself would later recall how absurd these fears were, yet they played a significant role in shaping his legend. For 5 years, he remained in federal prison, serving what was, at the time, the longest sentence ever given to a hacker for nonviolent crimes. While locked away, he became a symbol in the hacking community, a martyr of sorts, representing both the risks and the rebellious allure of cyber intrusion. His case ignited debates about the severity of punishments for digital crimes, with many arguing that he was being treated unfairly compared to those convicted of more tangible offenses. When he was finally released in 2000, he emerged into a world that had changed dramatically. The internet had evolved, cybersecurity had become a mainstream concern, and the very systems he once exploited had grown more sophisticated. But Mitnick himself had also changed. No longer the reckless digital outlaw, he decided to put his knowledge to good use. Instead of tearing down security systems, he began helping companies build stronger ones. He launched a successful career as a cybersecurity consultant, offering his expertise to corporations and government agencies on how to protect themselves from hackers like his younger self. He co-authored books such as The Art of Deception and The Art of Intrusion, which detailed real-world hacking techniques and strategies for defense. These books became essential reading for anyone interested in social engineering and cybersecurity, offering insight into how attackers think and operate. Mitnick also became a sought-after public speaker, giving lectures on security awareness, cyber threats, and the importance of ethical hacking. His ability to explain complex technical concepts in an engaging way made him a popular figure in the tech industry. He had gone from being the world's most wanted hacker to one of the most respected voices in cybersecurity. For over 2 decades, he dedicated his life to ethical hacking, helping businesses and governments strengthen their defenses against cyber threats. Despite his past, he was no longer a villain in the eyes of the law. He was now a trusted advisor. His journey from fugitive to consultant was proof that redemption was possible, even for someone who had once been on the FBI's most wanted list. But in 2023, tragedy struck. Mitnick was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, one of the most aggressive and deadly forms of the disease. On July 16, 2023, at the age of 59, he passed away, leaving behind a legacy that was equal parts infamous and inspirational. His death marked the end of an era in the hacking world. To many, he was a legend, the man who had outwitted the FBI, exposed the flaws in some of the most powerful systems, and ultimately used his talents for good. His story remains one of the greatest cyber thrillers ever told, a real-life tale of genius, rebellion, and redemption in the digital age. Despite his reputation as a lone wolf in the hacking world, Kevin Mitnick was not without love in his life. While much of his early years were consumed by his obsession with computers, social engineering, and outwitting law enforcement, he eventually found companionship outside of his digital pursuits. While some accounts suggest he had relationships during this period, secrecy was a necessity, making any long-term connections difficult. His was a life of isolation, paranoia, and constant avoidance, leaving little room for traditional romance. However, after serving his prison sentence and getting his life back on track, Mitnick finally found lasting love. He married Kimberly Mitnick, a woman who supported him in his final years. The couple shared a deep bond, and Kimberly remained by his side until his death in 2023. Their relationship symbolized a new chapter in Mitnick's life, where he was no longer a fugitive or a hacker, but a respected cybersecurity expert, mentor, and husband. Was Kevin Mitnick a criminal, a genius, a rebel, or all three? To some, he was a dangerous outlaw, a man who broke into systems, stole corporate secrets, and taunted law enforcement for years. To others, he was a visionary, a pioneer who exposed the vulnerabilities of the digital world long before cybersecurity became a global concern. He didn't just hack computers, he hacked the system itself, proving that the greatest security flaws often lie not in technology, but in human nature. His legacy is complex. For governments and corporations, he remains a cautionary tale, a reminder that no system is truly secure. For hackers, he is a legend, someone who played the ultimate game of cat and mouse with the FBI and won for years. And for cybersecurity professionals, he is both a warning and an inspiration, showing how social engineering can be just as powerful as any line of code. But whether you see him as a criminal mastermind or a misunderstood genius, one thing is undeniable: the world will never forget the name Kevin Mitnick. His story is a cyber thriller unlike any other, a tale of brilliance, deception, and the fine line between right and wrong in the digital age. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss more incredible stories from the world of hacking, technology, and digital crime. Let us know in the comments, was Mitnick a villain or a hero? Your thoughts might just spark the next great debate.